I'm going to present my thesis on arbor seals, Phoca vitulina, and gray seals, Halichoerus grypus, and the 3 R's, rescue, rehabilitation, and release. This is a project in conjunction with Syracuse Island, University College of Dublin, and Galway Mine Institute of Technology. So, arbor and gray seals are resident species in Republic of Ireland, and they are under protection by certain legislations that aims to protect and conserve both species and their habitat, such as the Wildlife Amendment Act 2000 and the European Habitats Directive, where they're included in Annex 5, which states that a species can be exploited, however, habitat and the species itself as conservation status has to be maintained and cannot be affected. And on Annex 2, which says that the parties, in this case, Republic of Ireland, is obliged to designate special areas of conservation in order to avoid interference with the species as well as their habitat. Republic of Ireland designated 13 special areas of conservation for arbor seals and 10 special areas of conservation for gray seals. There are threats to the conservation of those 2 species in Ireland that can lead to the stranding, both of life and death, as well as the abandoning and neglection of pups by their mothers. Those factors can be storms, diseases, and anthropogenic activities, both direct and indirect effects, such as fisheries, and they can lead to the admission into rehabilitation centers. Rehabilitation data, it's a very helpful tool since it promotes the advance of scientific and medical knowledge, as well as gives some insights of the state of the wild population. The aims for the study was to assess seasonality and HClass composition of admissions, the prevalence of diseases and association with age or sex class, hospitalization time and survival probability, and probable causes of death. For this, we work with Syracuse Island. It's the only rehabilitation center in the Republic of Ireland, and it plays an important role in the education of volunteers and interns, as well as the environmental awareness of the population, conservation and research projects, and of course, rehabilitation. For rehabilitation, they count with the annual license that covers all the seals they opt to admit in that year, and it's provided by the National Parks and Wildlife Service Wildlife Licensing Units. For this study, we use hard copy format data, and so we had to define some categories and other classifications based on previous studies, as well as Syracuse Island own categories, and create a database format. Categories such as temperature, that was based in known ranges of temperature based on previous studies, as well as, for example, nutritional status, that was based on the presence or absence of certain features. The H class was defined for Phoca vitulina and was for pup, winners, and yearlings, and this was based in the life history of the species as well as the estimated age. As for gray seals, this was different, so we defined it as neonate or newborn, white coat, mid-molt, and molted individuals, and this was based on the presence or absence of certain features as well as the coloration of the fur. For the disorders accessed in the study, we had non-mutual exclusive disorders, such as trauma, which included puncture wounds or bite wounds, netting injuries, non-classified wounds like abrasions, laceration, or others not reported in the clinical examinations, respiratory disorders such as pneumonia, lungworms, dermatological disorders such as dermatitis and sealpox, ocular disorders such as conjunctivitis, oral disorders such as gingival infections, gastrointestinal and cardiovascular disorders, as well as malnourishment or assessment of the nutritional status. For this last one, a different analysis was made due to the nature of the categories being ordinal. So for this category, we used ordinal regression model to see if there was an association with age or sex class and the respective nutritional status. For the remaining disorders, we used a univariate but binary logistic analysis to see if there was an association with age or sex class. For the seasonality, so the study went from October 2012 to the end of 2019, December 2019, and we saw that seasonality had an association with pup production. So in the Irish territory, Phoca vitulina, arbor seal, pup production occurs in June or July, and it corresponds to the second quarter of the year, and again, it corresponds to the peak of admissions into rehabilitation for the species. As for gray seals, the pup production occurs in October through December. corresponding to the third quarter of the year, and again corresponds to the peak of admissions for the species. And as you can see, there is an increase of admissions through the years. This is probably due to the awareness of the population and more seals being reported into rehabilitation. As for 2017, as you can see, there's a higher peak of admission, and this can be explained by Hurricane Ophelia that hit Ireland in October that year. For the composition of our study, we had 459 gray seals and 175 arbor seals. For both species, there were more than 50% being males. As for the age class composition, for arbor seal, more pups, more younger ages were admitted into rehabilitation. As for gray seals, older pups, molted pups were more admitted for rehabilitation. Regarding the temperature, so 387 seals had the temperature recorded, 114 arbor seals and 273 gray seals, and it shows that the majority of the recording was in the normothermic range of temperature for both species. For the nutritional status, as you can see in the y-axis the frequency and the x-axis the Phoca vitulina HClass, and the nutritional status underweight category was the most frequent nutritional status assessed for the species. However, an ordinal regression model couldn't show any association or any significance for that species. As for gray seals, Halichoerus grypus, again, frequency in the y-axis and the species HClass in the x-axis, where it shows that the most frequent nutritional status assessed for the species was underweight and then severely malnourished. Ordinal regression models show a significance between underweight and malnourished and severely malnourished intercepts, as well as in molted HClass. And as you can see in the graph, there is a higher likelihood of an individual being severely malnourished or malnourished and being in a molted HClass. Malnutrition was the most prevalent disorder for both species, more than 80% for both. As for the other prevalence of other disorders, I wanted to say that the second most prevalent disorder was traumatic disorders, and the univariate binary logistic analysis showed an association with age, which showed that pups were less likely to present a type of trauma. As for the third and fourth most prevalent disorder was gastrointestinal and respiratory disorders. However, only respiratory disorders shown in association with age, being older pups more likely to present this condition. As for gray seals, again, the second most prevalent disorder was trauma, with more than one type of trauma per individual. Due to the higher number of pups, of individuals presenting this disorder, puncture wounds was analyzed separately. However, an association using a univariate binary logistic analysis was not found. But for the remaining disorders, traumatic disorders, was found an association to be more likely in older pups and less likely in younger individuals. As for the third most prevalent disorder, this proved to be gastrointestinal and respiratory disorder with the same prevalence, and it showed there was an association with age and with pups being less likely to present these disorders, or that means older pups were more likely to present it. As for the success rate for seal rescue Ireland is more than 60% of released seals into the wild. As for the survival, we saw that there was an association with survival and hospitalization time. Therefore, as you can see in the graph in the y-axis for both, there's a survival probability, and in the x-axis there's a hospitalization time in days. And as you can see, there's a higher probability of surviving in the early stages of rehabilitation, and this decreases with time. Previous studies believe that there may be a crucial point where that's fundamental for the survival or perishment of the individuals in rehabilitation. For the necropsy reports, those data was provided by University College of Dublin, and in the overall, I wanted to highlight that the significant pathologies were connected to the probable cause of death, but I wanted to highlight that septicemia was the most probable cause of death for Arbor seals. This is, commonly speaking, blood poisoning, and it's caused by a bacterial infection that leads to sepsis and organ failure and posterior death. As for gray seals, malnutrition was the most probably cause of death. This may be due to the already poor state condition when admitted, but it can also be associated, like in previous studies, to immune response that consumes most part of the nutrients, and therefore it causes a mass loss and emaciation of the individual. Again, there are more factors that can lead to probably causes of death, such as parasites, bacteria, and virus. And I just wanted to highlight that brief assessments were made in these areas, and gray seals presented more respiratory parasites. As for the cardiovascular, I just wanted to highlight that Acanthocolonema spirocauda is a species of parasite that so far it's only found in arbor seals. However, it has a low rate of infection, and the cause of death of this individual was not determined. And finally, I wanted to say that virology assessment proved that there were 3 individuals that presented Halichoerus virus. This is a common outbreak virus in rehabilitation, and it affects more younger individuals due to have less antibodies, and those antibodies increase with age. This was the case of the study. 1 pup and 2 weaners presented this condition, and this can be transmitted for the mothers as well as other animals. As for concluding, I wanted to say that seasonality has in fact a correlation, association with pup production, as we saw in the graph. There were considerably more gray seals than arbor seals, 72.4 gray seals against 27.6 arbor seals. Malnutrition was the most prevalent disorder, and then trauma and the remaining ones. However, trauma and respiratory disorders proved to have an association with older age classes for both species. As for gastrointestinal disorders, this proved to only be to have an association with gray seal molted age, mid-molt and molted age classes. The probable causes of death is different for both species, being septicemia for Phoca vitulina and malnutrition for gray seals, for the reasons I stated before. Again, I wanted to highlight that respiratory parasites were more frequent or more assessed in gray seals. As for the arbor seals, I wanted to highlight again that Halichoerus virus is only present in arbor seals. However, we cannot exclude that other seals could not be affected, since only 79 of a total of 635 individuals were assessed in the necropsies. So therefore, we still don't know if more seals may have been affected or not. Finally, I wanted to conclude that methodology should be improved, since it's very susceptible to interpretation and it can be very biased and lead to misclassification, as well as a more focused study on the pathologies and parasites should be done in order to understand if there is novel diseases or novel disorders that can have been affected seals in Irish territory. I would like to thank you all for listening. I would like to thank my promoter, Dr. Sinead Murphy, and my co-promoter, Dr. Anne Johns, as well as Syracuse Island and University College of Dublin for the data provided. I wanted to thank Darren to help me inserting the data for the study, as well as to all my family and friends for the support. Thank you very much.